I think most people were anticipating the Houston Texans were going to have a nice turnaround season in 2014. Whether that was they were going to benefit from the last place schedule they had earned from the season before, the change in leadership at the head coaching position, a new voice, a new direction, any number of things. Maybe they weren't going to have so many injury problems, what have you. I think most people anticipated a nice improvement for the Houston Texans in 2014. And that's exactly what you got. You go from 2-14 to 9-7, a 7-game improvement. And that's something positive. That's something to build on going forward. It most certainly wasn't a failed first year under Bill O'Brien in Houston. However, when it comes to the Houston Texans, and it's pretty much been the case throughout the franchise's history since 2002, there are two types of teams, those that have a quarterback and those that don't. And the Houston Texans, even under some of the best years of Matt Schaub, really didn't have that quarterback or that guy. And they most certainly don't now. So when you look at their 9-7 performance in 2014, you have to sit there and say, is that a harbinger of better days ahead and better things to come? Or is that kind of the ceiling for what this team can accomplish and what this team can do? That's a very interesting question. And part of the reason they find themselves pondering that question is because of their failures in the NFL draft, more notably with the philosophy when it comes to the quarterback position. This is an organization that for years has seemed to de-emphasize the quarterback position, seems to not believe in the logic that is clearly factually based in today's NFL, that in order to succeed, a team must draft their franchise quarterback. This is not up for debate. This is not just some crazy opinion I have. This is a fact that I have based off of real, tangible, empirical, scientific evidence of the NFL over the past decade. You must draft your quarterback. So we could talk about them having successes with, obviously, J.J. Watt. I mean, one of the greatest players in the history of the Houston Texans organization that they're ever going to have. Someday he will probably supplant Andre Johnson as being the greatest Texan of all time. Look at 2013 first-round pick. DeAndre Hopkins, Nuke, has been a nice player. He had a good season last year. Kareem Jackson, the 2010 first-round pick, started to finally play up to being a former first-round pick in 2014. The problem is, though, they've had several misses. You look at 2013, both of the third-round picks, Brennan Williams and Sam Montgomery, were complete and total non-factors. Another former third-round pick in Devier Posey never amounted to anything. But again, it's the miss of not finding that franchise quarterback. It's the miss of not finding that guy. And you could point specifically to that 2014 draft class as being one big question mark. Look, I get that a lot of people were big on Jadeveon Clowney. I was not as big on him. I don't understand why this team thought that he was the best player in the draft and had to take him number 1 overall. When 1, I don't think he was the best player in this draft. Number 2, I don't think he was the best defensive player in this draft. And 3, I wasn't even sure of his fit in their 3-4 defense. And 4, I didn't even think he was the best 3-4 outside linebacker in last year's draft class. That would have been Khalil Mack. And of course, I was vindicated and validated on so many different points. And what's even more concerning about that 2014 draft class, it's one thing if the Houston Texans took Jadeveon Clowney and then he had that abortion of a rookie season that he had due to injuries, what have you. But to sit there and not make a move to trade back up into round 1 to get somebody like a Teddy Bridgewater, or sit there with the first pick of the second round and take a guy like Derek Carr, is one of those big-time philosophical farts and misses that this organization could pay the price for years to come. I mean, how's Xavier Su'a-Filo working out now? You could talk about Bill O'Brien wanting to establish a physical identity in both sides of the ball and this and that. That's all fine and good, but if you don't have a young quarterback that can throw the fucking football, at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter. And you could talk about the Houston Texans' improvement in 2014, and there was improvement there, quite a bit of improvement. They had a top-flight defense, a great running game. They had a nice 1-2 combination on the outside in Andre Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins. But where did they end up? Yes, 9-7, but out of the playoffs. Why? Because they didn't have a quarterback. It's that simple. So when you look at this offseason, you had to figure there were some changes coming for the Houston Texans because they're ultimately not where they want to be. Andre Johnson was cut, which was sad and unfortunate, but was an eventuality. Maybe it was a necessity for all parties involved. They lost Brooks Reed in free agency. They brought in Vince Wilfork and guys like Cecil Shorts and Nate Washington to try and make up for some of the lost production from losing Andre Johnson. They signed Brian Hoyer, traded away Ryan Fitzpatrick. But when you look at it, what did this team really do in the offseason to get a whole lot better? I don't know. Now, were they going to get a whole lot better in free agency? I don't know about that either. The only way this Houston Texans team is going to get better and take that next step is via the NFL draft, which is where those biggest improvements should come from. That's where those biggest improvements need to come from. What are the top needs for the Houston Texans? Well, number one, plain and simple, is quarterback. Now, unfortunately, with the 16th overall pick, they find themselves in a position where they're not going to be able to get Winston or Mariota. And then if they're taking a guy in day two, somebody like a Garrett Grayson or a Brett Hundley or what have you, there's no guarantee that that guy's going to turn into a long-term franchise quarterback. But until they address it appropriately, until they find that guy, that is going to be the number one draft need of the Houston Texans every single year. And any other site or any other person that tells you anything other than that being the number one, number two, and number three need, frankly, for this Houston Texans organization is a moron. Plain and simple. The Houston Texans are a perfect example of you can have all these pieces in all these different places, all these wonderful players, but if you don't have that franchise guy that can make that difference, that can piece it all together, you're just spinning your wheels and wasting your fucking time. And throughout the 13 seasons of their organization's history, for the most part, what have the Houston Texans done? They've spun their wheels and wasted everybody's fucking time. Plain and simple. Again, even 9-7 in 2014. It was against a last-place schedule, and they still didn't make the playoffs. And they still don't have a long-term answer at quarterback. I think that's one of those decisions that is going to come back and bite this organization in the rear for many years to come, is that they didn't trade up to get Bridgewater at the tail portion of round one, or they didn't take Derek Carr with the first pick of the second round. That's a bad decision. It was a terrible decision, and one that's going to cost this organization, again, for many years to come. What other needs do they have? I think they need help at center. You know, one thing that could help out a quarterback is to get some better protection, better run blocking in front of him. And that's been something that's been a bit of a weakness of this team for quite some time, is that interior of the offensive line. I think the offensive line in general, I don't know why they re-signed Derek Newton at right tackle. I don't see where he was worth re-signing, but they did. They need some help at the linebacker position on defense, most notably at inside linebacker. You know, you're lucky if Brian Cushing stays healthy, and even when he is, they still need help there on top of that. They could really use an impact three-down linebacker in the middle, but they could use more at the edge rush position too. Whitney Merciless, their 2012 first-round pick. I don't even think they picked up his fifth-year option yet, which tells you plenty. You know, he's been okay, but just okay, and most certainly hasn't been great. They've gotten absolutely nothing out of their first-round pick from 2014, Jadeveon Clowney, and with him coming off of a torn meniscus, they might never get what they expect to get out of a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. And now that you've let Brooks Reed go, you have an even bigger need with so many questions at the position. They need an edge rusher, and in a draft full of edge rushers, I'd expect the Houston Texans to address edge rusher sometime early in this draft. They need something at wide receiver. I'm sorry. Bringing in Cecil Shorts and Nate Washington in no way, shape, or form makes up for losing an Andre Johnson, even a somewhat declining Andre Johnson. They need a guy opposite DeAndre Hopkins, because now DeAndre Hopkins is going to be in a position where he's not the number two guy, he's going to be the number one guy, and you could expect to see a dip in his effectiveness and production. They could also use some help at running back, too. I know Alfred Blue had his moments, a sixth-round pick from last year, but when you look at it, Arian Foster, is going to be 29 this year. He has some injury history as well. They have no more Ben Tate in the fold, so they could use a backup running back to take some of that burden off of Arian Foster and potentially serve as that long-time replacement. In terms of the philosophy of this draft for the Houston Texans, with the 16th pick, Todd Gurley would make a lot of sense for the Houston Texans, assuming that he would be there. I think some people might question why they would take him, but if you're not going to have that young franchise quarterback, you better find a young franchise running back. And a guy like Todd Gurley would seem to fit the type of offense that Bill O'Brien would like to run, in particular with the running game. With the 16th pick, wide receiver, somebody like Devontae Parker, or if he's there, Breshad Perryman, could make a lot of sense for them, although I would think Devontae Parker is more the type of guy that they need. So I would expect that pick at 16 to be somewhere on the offensive side of the ball at this particular point in time. In the day two portion of the draft, I would expect there to be one pick spent on the offensive side of the ball and one pick spent on the linebacking core. And then day three is just kind of be guys that maybe fit into the system. But they need to find an offensive playmaker, because they're not going to be able to find a quarterback with that 16th overall pick. And if they do take one at 16th overall, they're really reaching. Really reaching, because I highly doubt Winston or Mariota is going to be there. So in that case, if you can't find the quarterback, got to find the next best thing. You need to find a difference maker on the offensive side of the ball. So I'd assume most Houston Texans fans would want that offensive playmaker to come in the form of Todd Gurley, or probably more so along the lines of somebody like a Devontae Parker. That's who I would expect them to take. But it's the Houston Texans. To me, last year when things clearly indicated that they should have either just taken Teddy Bridgewater to begin with, or at least taken Khalil Mack, they took Davion Clowney, and then backed that up by taking Xavier Su'a-Filo. Who knows what the hell the Houston Texans are going to do, other than probably waste their time and everybody else's time.